Good. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming out to Mission Not Impossible, NIST 853 High Impact Controls on AWS. I know it's a little late in the afternoon, so I definitely appreciate everybody sticking around. My name is Brian Webster, Principal Architect, Trend Micro. I spend the vast majority of my time helping customers to accelerate their move to AWS by simplifying implementation of security controls. With me today, hanging out, is Brett Miller, Professional Services Consultant in AWS, and I'll let him speak a little bit more about his role in a minute. Why do we come out here today? I hope everybody's in the right room. Brett and I sat down earlier this year and started to have a conversation about challenges that he faced and spoke with customers facing in implementing high impact controls. And really, Brett, please tell us a little bit more about how we got here.
Awesome. Hey, thanks. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about today is how we got here. How many people are building workloads in AWS that have to live up to the NIST security controls? Probably a lot of us, right? Is it a lot of fun? Right? Anyone say it's really fun? I mean, there are a few people out there that think this stuff is really fun. But no kidding aside, for the last 2.5 years in professional services, we've seen a lot of patterns. And a lot of patterns that have to do with some of the challenges that customers face moving to AWS. There's usually a long journey that customers have to take to get to AWS. One, you got to learn the technology, right? And the technology keeps getting more vast every year. We basically released about 700 new features next year, right? And that in itself is a learning curve to try to keep up with the pace of innovation. But what we heard over and over and over again for the first 6 months I was working on this was compliance, right? How do you take the technology that's in a form of an API and actually translate that to the controls, the NIST controls? That can be very challenging. Has anyone actually done that before? A couple people have. It is very time consuming. So what we did with Trend Micro and AWS, we sat down about 6 months ago and says we can do better. Should every customer have to figure out how to meet every single control of the 400 NIST controls you need to do? Can we templatize that? Can we actually take automation and couple it with the actual control documentation and just make it available so you don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over again? We all came up to the same conclusion: we can do this. The APIs are there. We can put our heads together and basically create something that's very prescriptive so you don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again, because everybody knows how much fun it is to map 400 NIST controls to the various AWS services, right? Probably not so much. So what we're going to do is talk to you today on how you can do this. We're actually going to show you sample code and give you access to templates that will actually build and construct environments that are not only secure to the AWS best practices you read about in the actual white papers, but we will actually give you the sample code, and we also give you the controls matrix, which is probably the most important part, right? The automation is awesome, but you have to make the auditors happy. We're going to show you on how we've translated all the different configurations that we're going to build for you through automation, and actually provide that as an ingestible format that you can make as an artifact to a part of your RMF process. You can bring it into tools like Telos Exacta, things that can really end the automation cycle. So we're pretty excited about sharing this with you today. Once again, this has been about 6 months in development, and we're really happy to share it with you. But what we believe, working together for the last 6 months, is that we can do a better job in basically saying it is possible to be high on AWS. It is possible to automate all of the controls or a lot of the controls necessary to meet the NIST framework of security controls, and we can show you how to do it in a very achievable way. Has anyone seen this before? Probably a couple, right? Seems pretty easy, right? You know, AWS takes care of everything up to the dotted line. Customers have to take care of everything else. Is this as easy to deal with in practice as it's illustrated here in the diagram? Some customers have said it's a little bit more challenging. There's a lot of nuances in the shared responsibility model that you need to figure out for yourself, right? There's over 500 different security mechanisms in AWS today. Which ones am I going to use? Which ones are appropriate to the workload? Which ones is going to help me secure my application? And even more important to a lot of auditors, how does that secure configuration map to the different controls? And how do we automate a lot of that? Now, AWS takes care of some of that for you. You can actually get our NIST package through FedRAMP, which can show you how you can actually inherit a lot of controls directly from AWS. But there's also a lot of controls that you need to do. And that's what we're going to concentrate on today, is how do you build secure applications in AWS through best practices, and how do you document those? And how do you get them through your own RMF process? That's what we're going to concentrate on today. So as I said, this is about a 6-month effort. And what we figured out, if you take the power of AWS, the power of the APIs to do infrastructure as code, and you layer on technologies like Trend Micro Deep Security, they can give you well on your way to path of actually getting NIST high in AWS. Is it going to get you all the way? No, it's not going to get you all the way. Why can't it? Because what we do doesn't actually go to the application layer. We can't dictate exactly which applications you're going to be running on AWS. So there's always going to be a delta for what you're going to have to document in your own workloads, because that's something that we can't do. We don't know what application server you're going to be running or what database you may or may not run. What we're going to do is help you deal with a lot of those infrastructure controls and be able to document it as such. And we believe if you take what we have given you and layer on your application level information on top of the artifacts, you can get well on your way to NIST high, right, on that system-specific layer. So we're pretty excited. Easy button, right? Who wants an easy button for compliance, right?
That was easy.
That's what everybody wants. So what we're going to show you is a lot of the end goals to help you get there. Along the way, we're going to show you exactly what is being done. The templates and the automation we're going to show you, we're not going to be able to talk about every nitnoid detail, but we're going to tell you about the patterns that we have incorporated in this automation, how that translates to a lot of the controls, and also how Trend Micro, layered on top of AWS, can help you get well on your way to meeting the goal of NIST high. Pretty cool? How easy is it? Well, we try to make it easy as possible. You can actually download our scripts or go to our Quick Start website, pretty much provide about 3 or 4 parameters which you can choose to customize this, provide a deep security manager, username and password, and pretty much hit next, right? We've had people be able to launch these environments that are very sophisticated that encompass a lot of the NIST controls in the matter of 3 to 4 minutes to get it started. So we're going to describe this process as we go through the discussion today. And at the end, hopefully you guys will be encouraged to actually go to our Quick Start website and try it for yourself. We're going to provide all the templates and all of the security control matrices so you can then take them, adopt them in your own organization, tailor them to your own needs so you can be successful in helping you get to that greater goal of moving faster to the cloud, right, with more confidence, because you know you've had a lot of those security controls built in. So what do these scripts actually do? Well, it's probably some of the things you're already doing, right? You're using IAM. Who's using IAM? I would assume pretty much all of us if you're using AWS. So what we've done is actually encapsulate all the best practices that you're going to find if you read a lot of our white papers, but we're going to put a lot of those best practices in the templates themselves. So for instance, as everybody knows, IAM is the principal service that you can use to control access of who can do what in your environment. We've templatized all of those roles, all of those users, all of those permissions into a template that you can download. Why is that important? One, you don't have to figure it out for yourself, right? That's pretty cool. And you can feel confident it's been reviewed by a lot of third parties and other people to validate that what's actually being deployed through automation is actually pretty good. And more importantly, it helps you get to the goal of an ATO, right? Because a lot of those IAM configurations all map to NIST controls that you see there on the right side. A lot of things we do in IAM will have direct mappings to audit and accountability, access control, configuration management, so on and so forth. And what we're going to describe later is how we did the mapping from the actual configurations to a controls matrix, which you can just use and modify for your own use. Make sense? Awesome. Cloud Trail, another thing I wanted to point out. Everyone should be using Cloud Trail, right? If you're not, you probably should be, right? It's a primary pillar of providing security in AWS, right? It's an audit mechanism which is going to collect all types of API calls and who did them and when they did them in an S3 bucket so you can then use them for later ingestion into other tools. But since it's such a good practice, we've made it mandatory. We've actually built it into a lot of our scripts. So if you run our scripts, it'll automatically ensure that Cloud Trail is turned on. It'll automatically create a bucket for you. And then even better, it'll map all of those mechanisms to the actual control families in NIST, right? So you don't have to do it for yourself, right? Pretty cool, because we understand that developers love dealing with spreadsheets and controls, and they don't mind going through 800 control families or controls. Is that right? Probably not so much. And so any way you can actually take away a lot of that burden from the developers, one, it's going to be done consistently, right? And you're going to have a high level of confidence that it's repeatable. And through our CloudFormation, you're going to be able to repeat this process over and over again. Pretty cool, right? Awesome. So what you're seeing here, when you execute our scripts, it'll actually start building a secure and compliant architecture in AWS. It'll be doing over 250 different API calls, from setting up everything from CloudFormation all the way to IAM, to the bucket policies, are all going to be enforced via these scripts. So not only does it start in an hour, it gives you a really good example on how to be secure and compliant in AWS. Cool? Awesome. So what else is configured? So I talked about IAM and some of these other things, but we also configure a lot of things like SNS and AWS CloudWatch. Why is that important? Because security, ISSOs, and security personnel want to know what's going on, right? So we automatically set up the notifications. So if anyone tries to mess around with an IAM policy, it'll automatically notify an administrator that those things are taking place. So that way, you can always keep track of what is getting changed in your environment. We built all of that into the templates. And of course, since you're basically configuring something to be secure, there's actually a translation to a NIST control that we document inside of our spreadsheets. Could you do this on your own? Absolutely. But we decided together, why don't we just do it for you and then just give it to you to be able to modify at your own will. Pretty cool stuff. VPC, network ACLs and security groups, right? Again, another pillar for actually implementing security in AWS. You can read the white papers. We have a lot of information out there. But what we've done is we've pre-configured VPCs with all the necessary security to not only be secure, but also has made that documented inside of a security control matrix. So not only can you feel confident that you're doing things correctly, but it's also pre-documented for you. Pretty cool? Awesome. And once again, that translates back into security controls from the NIST perspective. All right, so what you're seeing here in the diagram is actually building the entire environment from the infrastructure up. And then as you see the higher level stacks, it's actually starting to create the Trend Micro deep security infrastructure. It's building it from the bottom up. So it's building up all your networking, all your VPCs, all of the secure configurations, and then it starts kicking off building an entire deep security suite on top of that infrastructure. So within an hour, you have a fully built a reference architecture that's built to best practices, and it's production ready. So that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Brian, and you can talk a lot about some of the Trend Micro deep security pieces that are being leveraged on top of that AWS infrastructure that's being pre-configured for you.
Perfect, thanks, Brett. So we've now built, you've seen built, watch CloudFormation build for you the VPCs, the core management infrastructure, the core auditing infrastructure, the automation for notifications from that infrastructure. And we need to look a little bit further past that when we want to really get serious about controls. The end of the day, it's phenomenal to have all of these pieces in place for what we're building on AWS services, but we need to start to be able to get some inspection inside of an instance. We start looking down at especially high controls. We need the ability to look at what's executing inside of an instance. We need the ability to inspect data inside of an instance. We need some controls to address the application that's running inside itself. At some point, you probably went to AWS to run a workload and get some line of business objective done, not just to have a very pretty, very auditable infrastructure laying around. So Trend Micro Deep Security delivers a series of file and network-based controls from a single agent that lives inside the instance. We deliver all of those protections and capabilities and that insight back to a single management console that gives you visibility across regions, across availability zones, across accounts, and put all of that intelligence in one place that is actually useful for a security administration team on which to take action. As we walk through the template a little bit more, we can see CloudFormation is spinning up our RDS instance. It's going to go on to create Deep Security Manager servers, the front ends that actually deliver the intelligence and the UI and API calls for interacting with all of those security services. The management layer of deep security is really the central core for visibility. Whether you interact with it from the web console in your browser or interact with it through API calls, very similarly to the way that you might access AWS services on a daily basis, we're delivering the insight, management, and security correlation to give you additional controls for your workloads beyond what AWS services provide today. We're giving the ability to intelligently and automatically recommend rule sets and rules for protection based on the context of a workload itself. We're delivering the ability to see instances that may be of like workload. Maybe I have an application that's highly available across regions, and I want to be able to treat those instances very similarly. I need to provide the same type of policy and the same type of protection and controls, regardless of where those instances live, and I want to see them in one place, and I want to see that status in one place. So getting down to actual security controls, I talked about file and network controls. On the file side, the primary things that we're delivering are the ability to detect and prevent execution of malicious code. It's a very important NIST control at any level. We're also delivering integrity monitoring. So when I look at a threat model, when somebody bad wants to get into my system, the very first things they want to do is establish a footprint. So they're either coming in and they're dropping something new in an application, or they're modifying a configuration file. Those are very important security items for me to see. These are very important controls for me to have, and to have those bubbled up as alerts quickly to a security team. If somebody changes the Apache configuration file and there was no change window, I probably need to know that right now. We also find that there's a huge wealth of information inside operating systems on the instance that can be very, very difficult for organizations to leverage. My favorite example, if Brett here bounces his password to a Bastion host 5 times in 5 minutes, he probably needs to pick a shorter password to learn how to type better. If Brett bounces that same password 5 times per second for 5 minutes straight, that's a security incident. I need a red light, I need an alert, I need it bubbled up now. If that's happening across multiple Bastion hosts in my infrastructure, I really need to know that all in one place, all delivered to the same security team, and I need to know it now. These are the types of controls that we're adding baked into the instance deployment from the beginning with this quick start, with these CloudFormation templates, so that by the time your application is actually up and running, you have protection, it's up to date, and you know the security status of your workloads. Network controls, we definitely have a huge number of tools, very sophisticated tools available to us in AWS. In this quick start alone, we're configuring VPCs to isolate different types of applications. We're configuring subnet groups that are isolating different tiers of applications. We're configuring network ACLs on each of those subnet groups to isolate the type of traffic and control the type of traffic that's allowed between tiers, and most especially to prevent anyone from skipping tiers when you have a multi-tier application that shouldn't be traversed. We have security groups. For layer 3-4 firewall, this is fantastic technology. They're great to manage. I have a stateful firewall. I have flexible targeting. I can look at targeting security groups and members of the security group as source and destination for access control lists instead of just individual IPs. I can look at subnets and IP address ranges. It's a great, great tool. Why do I want to add additional layers? Deep Security's firewall component adds the ability to look at further stateful context. So now I can see the difference between a machine that's allowed to talk to me and a machine that's allowed to talk to me but is running a reconnaissance scan of my system in an attempt to fingerprint the applications or the operating system and potentially discover vulnerable applications or a way in. Deep Security also adds the capability to look at layer 7 inspection. So if a layer 3-4 firewall is simply the ability to make a decision on its individual packet based on the source and destination address and port, layer 7 is the ability to add up all of the packets, combine the data that would be delivered to the application on the operating system, and now make a decision based on what content would be delivered. The IPS capability specifically addresses numerable security assessment and authorization controls, and as well as a huge host of system communications protection, the ability to inspect encrypted traffic, the ability to monitor and block encrypted traffic, and a number of system and information integrity controls to be able to look at outbound traffic as well. We can watch here as CloudFormation finishes deploying our application for us. As CloudFormation completes the stack build, you can go through and see each of the resources that are created by the infrastructure. You can go through and see the outputs as well. And this is really what we're after here, is delivering you a way to build an infrastructure that's tied to documentation from day one. The moment you start building the infrastructure, you have documented what you put in place, how it was built, and you've also documented that you had an audit trail from the day that you clicked the go button. Why CloudFormation? Beyond being a spectacular AWS service, and we love it a lot, Brett and I were a little bit lazy, I'll be honest there. We had some CloudFormation work. Brett had some CloudFormation work. The existing compliance accelerator for NIST 853, Trend Micro Deep Security. We also keep a quick start. It is honestly my preferred way to deploy the product in AWS. Beyond laziness and beyond the fact that it already existed, this is a spectacular tool. These are all reusable components. We didn't rebuild the NIST accelerator and add deep security in. I bolted it on, right? The management VPC template can be deployed by itself. The logging VPC template can be deployed by itself. The deep security stack can be deployed by itself. The application VPC and the application templates. You could come along and say, we really love this, but I don't have a WordPress application. I need to pull that out. And you can just remove it and have your custom application plugged into the existing application VPC template. You can move on to the next application, to the next team, and you can reuse all of these bits of code to deploy the next application. Mentioned briefly the audit baseline. This is really, really important. So we're going to spend huge amounts of time as organizations explaining why we made a choice. We're going to spend a huge amount of time documenting the choices that we've made. And a lot of exercises when I show up and talk to an organization it's about how to backtrack, right? So we deployed this thing, we were in a huge hurry, it absolutely had to be up right now. How do we go back and show that we built this in a best practices compliant way? How do we go back and say, I read all of Brett's white papers and I know that I built IAM the way that AWS recommends it be built? How do I go back and show that I talked to Trend Micro and I had a conversation and this guy Brian showed up and he said, yes, this is the right way, do it this way. Well, I don't have that documentation if I had a conversation, right? CloudFormation is my documentation, right? I'm going to stick this in a GitHub repo, and I'm going to see every change that was ever made. I'm going to have a comment from every developer that ever touched it. I'm going to know exactly how it was deployed the day it started, and I'm going to be able to show in that same documentation that I had an audit trail turned on from the day it started. I couldn't not have an audit trail when I created this infrastructure. And because Cloud Trail is logging every API call, if it's changed in the future and somebody turns off the auditing, I'll know when that was done, I'll know who did it. Third-party integration, this is one of my kind of pet peeves, but Brett was kind enough to let me drop it in. If you're looking at a product or you're talking to a team that says, no, you can't really deploy that application with CloudFormation, I would talk to that team again and figure out how you can get it done. There are a number of fantastic tools for ongoing maintenance and integration, upgrades, lifecycle, and certainly spectacular CI/CD tools out there. But for actually deploying your AWS infrastructure and bringing core services up in line, this is the way to go. So look for your tools to have the ability for CloudFormation to do your deployment. No hands, no touching, no next buttons, no log in and do all your configuration. It needs to be up and running when you're done launching a stack. Otherwise, the audit trail didn't help us that much. Otherwise, the documentation and the implementation didn't help us that much, and we have this huge gap.
All right. So now I'm going to talk about some stuff that isn't always popular, but it's very important, right? The controls. Who loves controls, right? You know, the technology can be really sexy. You can automate the entire thing, but there are certain folks that really care about the controls. You can build something all day long, and it can be elastic, and it'd be cool, but if it doesn't translate into the language that auditors want to see, it's a no-go, right? You can't get an ATO. You can't get an authorization. So that's why it's so important to actually document it appropriately. It doesn't matter what APIs you have. If you can't translate in a language that auditors and authorizing officials understand, that's a big problem. So we spend actually the majority of our time translating controls and technology and putting them all together, because we understand that could be very painstaking for a lot of customers, and they said so to us very directly. If you've ever gone through the 800 different controls in the 853 control set and tried to map it to 50 different AWS services, you can imagine that it could be pretty time consuming. So we spent a lot of painstaking work going through every single control in the NIST family to be categorization agnostic, not meaning that we didn't pick just low controls or medium controls or even high controls. We just said, let's look at them all, and then you're going to apply to the highest MARTA mark, which is high. That's where everyone wants to go these days. And we provide that to you from our Quick Start website. We're using the Rev 4, which is the most current set of NIST controls, and we will provide all that information to you. Once again, so you can actually take these controls and actually modify them for your own use, make your own baselines, right? Take what we have done, own it, make it into your own set of reference architectures that maybe you use, something like Service Catalog in order to distribute to your enterprise, or use things like ServiceNow in order to distribute them to your enterprise. We'll give you a lot of the example templates and the controls matrix so you can move faster. Once again, you don't have to go over that that baseline information. We'll provide that to you. So how do you get there? How do you get to our quick start? Well, it's relatively easy. We actually have if you actually Google AWS Quick Start or go to our aws.amazon.com/quick start, you're going to see an all new category of quick starts that you can actually download from. We've taken Enterprise Accelerator, which we're calling kind of the library of reference architectures along with security documentation, and we've made them for particular third-party frameworks to include PCI, NIST, and the one we're talking about today, which is NIST High, right? You can go to the drop-down, you can hit a button, and in about 5 minutes, it'll start building that entire infrastructure for you, layered with deep security, not only configured, but completely installed. So you'll actually watch an environment come up that's going to have app servers. It's going to have proxy servers. It's going to have the Trend Micro deep security basically managing them all. So the beauty of this, at the end of the day, after about an hour, you can actually log into deep security and look at all of your infrastructure being controlled and policy being pushed to those instances and have full visibility in what is going on in your environment. We're pretty excited about it. So getting back to the control coverage for NIST High, here's a chart that kind of describes the different types of controls we are satisfying to help you get down to that road of NIST High. Once again, this is not a silver bullet. Once again, a lot of the NIST controls, as you will know, are organizational. A lot of these are application specific, but all the ones that we could possibly look at from an infrastructure perspective, we have documented as long as there's an appropriate API that we can use in order to control that environment. Is it perfect? What you're going to have to do is, as an organization, is to take the documentation, take the templates, and modify them for your own use. Remember, we created something that needs to be broadly applicable across 1 million customers. What needs to be done is making these very generic reference architectures very specific to your needs. There are some things that you're probably going to see in this quick start. You say, well, that's not really relevant to my organization or my workload, but you can take them out. If there's something you don't like about a particular template, you can take it out or you can add to it. The idea behind Enterprise Accelerator is in order to give you the documentation and the automation to help you get there faster. And that's the real key behind that. So this is going to be an eye chart for a lot of you guys, but I encourage you to actually download it from our Quick Start website. This is actually the controls matrix. We actually spent last 6 months, probably 80% of our time actually working on this matrix. Because as you know, NIST controls are not always super specific, right? And you have to interpret every single one of controls and how you're going to implement that across various services in AWS, and then try to get a consensus as what you wrote is going to be broadly applicable to different authorizing officials, different types of roles. So we went through every single high control and actually made the determination is, can we meet this control at the infrastructure layer? Can we turn it on via an API or CloudFormation? And how does that actually translate to the documentation which is contained within the spreadsheet? Here is a perfect example of one of those controls. So for instance, we'll break down the control by the family. What is it? What type of control is it? Is it addressed by AWS? Is it addressed by Trend Micro? Or is it a combination of both? In a lot of cases, actually a combination of both, right? But we actually document that for you. What type of category is it? Is it an infrastructure type control? Is it an application type control? Is it a shared control? Is it an inherited control? Is this something you would get automatically from AWS? We'll have that in its own column. The next two are probably the most important out of all the columns. This is actually the verbiage which we've created that you can use in your own ATO packages on how either AWS, using this reference architecture, helps you meet this control, or from a Trend Micro perspective, how you can meet this control using deep security and the things that were just built for you in Quick Start. So if you take all this together and you layer on your application-specific type controls, like for instance, there's a configuration management control, we can't actually know how you're handling your own app. How are you doing configuration of your own app? Are you using Are you using GitLab? Are you controlling developers accessing the code? Those are things we can't do. But what we can do is try to cover as much as we can at the infrastructure layer. And then if you bake in the infrastructure layer on the app layer, you can be well on your way to an ATO to meet a lot of the NIST high controls and have a lot of confidence in how you're doing it. Make sense? Cool. So how does it work? So I said we tried to make these things modular. So the Enterprise Accelerator, we took a hard look into try to create modules which can be used as building blocks. We've heard throughout today the analogy of Legos, right? You don't tell a kid how they're going to build Legos, right? You let them kind of use the different pieces and make them fit together in whichever way they want to. We've designed the Enterprise Accelerator along with the Deep Security Stack to be just as modular. We've put in different functions in different stacks or different layers that you can use in different types of ways. So for instance, you have an access stack, which is basically foundational. This sets up all the users, the groups, the roles. All of the APIs you're allowed to do. Your policy of least privilege is all done on the access stack. And then as you go up the different stack layers into like the network stack, that configures all your VPCs, all of your networking, all of your gateways, your route tables, your network ACLs, all the things that you can configure an environment to not only be secure, but also translate into the appropriate control. Right? Makes sense? And then on top of that, you have the security stack. This is where we would configure all the load balancers, the S3 bucket policies, the security groups, the SNS, the SQS, the CloudWatch. All of this would be done in a very modular way inside the security stack. And as we continue to go up the stack, we go into the server data stack. In our quick start, we actually deploy a fully functional WordPress application to show you how you can basically build all this automation with a very generic app that's built in a very resilient and highly available way. Are you going to use WordPress for your own app? Probably not. But it gives you a nice placeholder, right? You can actually take out the WordPress, slap in your own application, and it go and do the same types of things. But we wanted to give you a working application that is actually protected by Trend Micro, that you can actually see policies and securities being pushed in real time. Pretty cool, right? And then on top of it, you have all the Trend Micro stuff. So after you build the infrastructure, you'll see how Trend Micro is building their pieces. It's going to deploy the Deep Security Manager. It's going to inject all the user data into the application stack and into the proxy stack in order to control all the instances that are being built in front of your eyes. That all happens in that stack. But the idea is that each one of these stacks can be independent. It means you can choose as an organization which ones are important to you, which ones are okay to use in their entirety, which ones you want to throw out, or which ones you want to tailor to your own specific use cases. It's all up to you. They're building blocks. So if you go to our Quick Start website, you can actually download all of these scripts. And we encourage you to do that. Use them for your own use. Modify them, own them, create your own reference architectures that you can pre-approve and then allow developers to just use. Because you know the security posture, you know the risk tolerance that you have, you've already done an assessment, therefore let developers use it. And it can increase your speed to the cloud. It can also increase the amount of confidence you have in what's being built across your architectures. So we encourage you to do that. And once again, they're all building blocks that you can use once you download them at our website.
So as we watch the last little bit of our WordPress application finish up top there, you can actually look through the resources in CloudFormation. You can see everything that's been built. You can see what each of the template builds. You can click each of those links, and you can go look at the individual resources built by API calls by each nested template in the stack. And then this is the best part for me. Like, this is the coolest part of CloudFormation. This is the coolest part of the whole gig. I go to the output section, and I find a link that says, here's my application. I find another link that says, let's go log into Deep Security. I log into Deep Security. It already sees every instance in my account across every region. It's already there. I already see all my green lights. I know that my capability to detect malicious code is up to date it's running, and I know whether or not there have been any alerts. I already know that I have an extra firewall running on each instance that gives me additional layered capabilities over top of network ACLs and on top of security groups. I already know that I have IPS rules appropriate to my environment that are assigned specific to each instance being run in the application. I know that the proxy layer has different security requirements than a bastion host, than a web server, than an application server, and I know that those rules have been assigned automatically, that they're already running. I know that critical system files are being monitored for changes. And I know that I'm looking at all of the relevant log files specific to that application and operating system for additional security intelligence that I can bubble up to my SOC or to my security teams. AWS.amazon.com/quickstart. Everything we've talked about today is hosted there for you. We really mean it. I'm not too proud. I don't think that you should use my templates exactly the way I built them just because it's the way I built them, or that our integration is perfect and no one will ever improve on it. We know that there are diverse applications. We know that some organizations host VPCs based on individual application. Some of them split VPCs by tier. Some set up VPC for test, one for implementation, one for development, another for production. We absolutely encourage you to go out, look at these resources, download the templates, make the customizations you need. Maybe you don't need one application VPC. Maybe you need 5. Maybe your application instances are a 2-tier application instead of a 3-tier application. And make them yours. Give us feedback about them. Go to the GitHub repo, make a change, put in a pull request. Tell us about the things that you're doing with this body of work and how you've applied it in your environment. Go through the deployment guide. Look at the security controls matrix. Brett's not kidding. This wasn't really my bag. The giant spreadsheet was not my personal favorite part of the project. Several people in the room laughing about that for sure. But this is a hugely important piece of documentation for any organization that's looking to figure out, how do I show compliance? I know I did all the right things. The auditor doesn't believe me because I said so. They don't want to take my word for it. Where do I get the language for my proof of this control? How did I meet the control? And how do I insert that into my documentation? Absolutely let us know how you're using these things.
A couple of things I wanted to mention is one of the other things that you'll find when you start using these templates and start templatizing or pre-approving your own application suites is that you're building all of your security through automation, right? You're doing things in a predictable manner that can be automated and done one time or 1,000 times. What that does to what we've seen a lot of the organizations come back and say, developers actually want to use this stuff. It's because security is easy. And when security is easy, it'll actually get done. So why not take that onus away from those developers to have to do a lot of this infrastructure building on their own and do this documentation and just have it done? It makes the developers happy because most developers actually don't want to build all this stuff or build it in an appropriate way. They just want to code, right? Developers want to code. So if we can make it easier as security professionals to take that onus away from, not only can they move faster, but the enterprise can be much more confident going into the cloud. And that's what's really important, right? We don't want to increase risk into the cloud, but using this type of automation and having the confidence that a lot of the security is done and it translates over to controls that an authorizing official can understand, that is what's really powerful, and that will really help speed things up and make all the decision makers in the organization feel confident that things are being done in a repeatable manner and they're being done in a way that is going to guard the data and that they have all of the evidence ready to go without every organization having to recreate those stuff over and over again. Once again, our spreadsheet, as you will download it, is just one piece of the puzzle. We encourage you to take these spreadsheets, they're in consumable formats, and bring them into a tool. Whatever tool that you're using, EMAS, Telos, Exacta, Arch, or whatever it may be, you can actually use whatever automation tool you have at your disposal to bring these things in and really helped automate compliance and security in an organization, we feel that that is really a pillar of the next successful wave of applications going into AWS.
So thanks very, very much. Really appreciate everybody sticking around. I know that, so number one, because it's getting late in the hour, and number two, the nature of these topics, not everybody is super thrilled to ask their question out loud in the room. I got one or two. Brett and I will hang out up here. We'll let folks that want to get some food or other evening activities on. And please, I encourage you all, come on up and hang out with us for a few. Thanks very much for coming out.
Thanks, guys.